My sister laughed in my face when I asked for $150. An hour later, I withdrew $4.2 billion from her bank, and I watched her entire world come to a grinding halt. My name is Stella, I'm 41 years old, and this is the story of how I finally collected a debt that had been owed for a lifetime. But before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe, and drop a comment to let me know where you are watching from. The sound of my sister's heels was the first thing you noticed. A sharp, expensive click-clack on the polished marble floors of the bank lobby. It was a sound that announced her arrival, a sound that demanded attention. My own shoes, a pair of comfortable but worn-down flats, made no noise at all. I had always tried to move through the world quietly, to take up as little space as possible. Vanessa, on the other hand, took up all the space in the room. I was standing in line, waiting for the next available teller, clutching the strap of my old leather purse. It was a Tuesday morning and the bank was moderately busy. The air smelled of clean money and faint corporate air freshener. I just needed to withdraw a small amount of cash, $150, to pay the repairman who was coming to fix my ancient dishwasher. It was a simple, mundane task, one that shouldn't have caused the knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. But I knew that any interaction in Vanessa's world, on her turf, was a risk. Stella, is that really you? Her voice cut through the low hum of the lobby. It was sweet, like honey, but I knew it was the kind of honey that could hide poison. I turned slowly. There she was, my older sister, Vanessa, the branch manager of Crescent National Bank. She looked perfect, as always. Her tailored black suit was flawless, her blonde hair was pulled back into a sleek, elegant knot, and her smile was wide, bright, and completely fake. Heads turned. The man in front of me glanced over his shoulder. The teller at the counter paused, her hands hovering over her keyboard. In an instant, I was the center of attention, and my cheeks began to burn with a familiar heat. "Vanessa," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Hi." She walked toward me, her heels clicking with purpose. She didn't hug me. She never did. Instead, she stopped a few feet away and looked me up and down, her eyes lingering for a moment on my simple cotton blouse and faded jeans. Her perfect smile tightened just a fraction. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice loud enough for everyone in the first 3 teller lines to hear. "I thought you did all your banking online from that little, what is it, a credit union?" I swallowed hard. "I just needed some cash," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The ATM outside was out of order. I just wanted the ground to open up and swallow me. I wanted to disappear. But I stood my ground, my worn wallet feeling heavy and pathetic in my hand. Vanessa glanced at the withdrawal slip I was holding. She leaned in as if sharing a secret, but her voice remained theatrical and loud. $150? She said, her eyebrows shooting up in mock surprise. "Stella, that's all you're here for?" A woman behind me shifted her weight, pretending not to listen, but her eyes were fixed on us. The security guard near the door had stopped his slow pacing. The lobby, which had been filled with a gentle murmur of activity, was now eerily quiet. All I could hear was the blood pounding in my ears. Then came the final cruel twist of the knife. Vanessa let out a short, sharp laugh. It wasn't a sound of humor. It was a weapon. "Do you even have that much in your account?" she asked, the words echoing off the high ceilings. "I'd hate for you to get a declined fee. I could spot you if you need it. I think I have a 20 in my purse." That was it. The public humiliation, gift wrapped in a package of fake concern. It was her specialty. For years, she had done this in smaller ways, at family dinners, at holiday gatherings. But here, in front of strangers, in the place where she was queen, it felt different. It felt sharper, colder. The sting of it was so intense it almost felt physical, like a slap across the face. My palms itched. My first instinct was to run, to flee the bank and the dozens of eyes that were now boring into me. I wanted to shrink until I was nothing but a speck of dust on the marble floor. But then, something inside me shifted. It was a tiny, quiet click, like a lock finally falling into place after years of being jammed. I was tired, so deeply, bone-achingly tired of being her punching bag. I didn't run. I didn't cry. I lifted my head and looked directly into her cold blue eyes. I saw the flicker of triumph in them, the satisfaction she got from making me feel small, and I gave her something she didn't expect. I smiled. It was a faint smile, barely there, but it was real. "Yes," I said, my voice surprisingly calm and clear, though it felt like it belonged to someone else. "I have enough, and I'll be withdrawing a little more soon." The double meaning was for me alone. She couldn't possibly understand it. Vanessa scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "Right, maybe enough for coffee?" "Don't let me hold up the line." She turned and walked away. her heels clicking her victory march across the floor. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. In her mind, she had won. She had put her pathetic little sister back in her place. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. I watched her disappear into her glass-walled office. The words Vanessa Solon, branch manager, etched in elegant gold letters on the door. I turned back to the counter, my face a neutral mask, and waited for my turn. The teller, a young woman with kind eyes, avoided looking at me directly. She just processed my transaction quickly and quietly, as if doing me a favor. As I walked out of the bank, the heavy glass doors swinging shut behind me, the cool morning air felt good on my hot cheeks. That day wasn't the first time my sister had humiliated me. It wasn't the first time she had made me feel worthless, but I made a silent promise to myself right then and there, standing on that cold pavement. It was going to be the last. Growing up, our family was a solar system, and Vanessa was the sun. Everything and everyone orbited her. My parents, my grandparents, our neighbors, they were all caught in her gravitational pull. She was bright, dazzling, and always at the center of things. And I was Pluto, a distant, cold, forgotten rock, barely considered part of the system at all. I was the quiet one, the invisible one, the one who was just there. While Vanessa was out winning debate tournaments, being crowned prom queen, and getting early acceptance into a prestigious business school, I was in my room with a book, or in the garage taking apart old radios to see how they worked. My world was internal, made of circuits and stories. Hers was external, made of applause and admiration. My parents didn't mean to be cruel. They just didn't know what to do with me. I was a puzzle they couldn't solve, so they put me back in the box and focused on the daughter they understood. Vanessa's achievements were tangible, easy to brag about at dinner parties. A trophy, a new car, a promotion. My achievements were quiet. Fixing the broken toaster, writing a piece of code that made the family computer run faster, reading a classic novel in a single weekend. I was the family's resident repairman, the background support crew. I fixed things, but I never got thanked for it. It was just expected. My contributions were like air, essential, but completely unnoticed. I remember one afternoon when I was about 20. I had just launched my first small tech startup from my college dorm room. It was a tiny company that created custom software for local businesses. A small local newspaper had run a feature on me, a little human interest story with a grainy photo. It was the proudest moment of my life up to that point. I had created something from nothing. I had built it with my own hands, my own mind. I bought 10 copies of the paper and drove home for the weekend, my heart thumping with a nervous excitement I hadn't felt before. I wanted them to see me. Just this once, I wanted them to really see me. I found my parents in the kitchen. My mom was chopping vegetables for dinner, and my dad was reading the sports section. "Mom, Dad," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Look." I unfolded the newspaper and laid it on the kitchen island, pointing to the article. They wrote about my company. My mom wiped her hands on her apron and leaned over. "Oh, that's nice, dear," she said, her eyes scanning the page for a few seconds before returning to her carrots. My dad lowered his paper. He skimmed the headline and the first paragraph. I watched his face, searching for a flicker of pride, a hint of surprise, anything. He folded the paper back up and handed it to me. "That's nice, dear," he said, his voice flat. He then turned to my mom. "Did you hear? Vanessa just closed on her first house. It's a beautiful 3-bedroom in the suburbs. She's having a housewarming party next month. We should think about what to get her." And just like that, my moment was over. My tiny star had been extinguished by the blinding light of the sun. It wasn't a house. It wasn't a promotion. It was just a little article in a local paper. It couldn't compete. That was the moment I truly understood. In their story, the story of the Solon family, I was a background character. I was an extra, a set piece. I was there to fill the frame, but I didn't have any lines. My purpose was to be the quiet, stable backdrop against which Vanessa's brilliant life could unfold. The hurt from that day was a cold, heavy stone in my chest, but it was also clarifying. I realized that trying to win their approval was a fool's errand. It was like trying to catch smoke in my hands. So I stopped trying. I stopped sharing my successes. I stopped talking about my work. I built a wall around my life, not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. I became an expert at being invisible. At family gatherings, I'd find a quiet corner, nurse a drink, and offer polite, non-committal answers when spoken to. "Yes, work is fine. No, nothing new to report." They accepted it easily. It was the role they had already cast me in. The quiet one. The simple one. The one who didn't do much of anything. So I built my own story in silence. I built it on sleepless nights, fueled by coffee and code. I built it in the quiet solitude of my small apartment, far away from the blinding glare of my family's expectations. They thought my world was small and gray. They had no idea I was building an empire in the dark. Part 3. The Secret. They never knew, behind my simple life, my small rented apartment, my second-hand car, my modest clothes, I was hiding something vast. A secret so large and so valuable that it felt like another dimension, a parallel universe that only I had the key to. It was a secret that began with $8,000 and a promise. The money came from my grandmother, the only person in my family who ever truly saw me. She wasn't interested in Vanessa's trophies or my parents' ambitions. She was interested in the things that made my eyes light up. She would sit with me for hours while I explained the logic of a circuit board or the beauty of a line of code. She didn't always understand the technical details, but she understood the passion. When she passed away, she left Vanessa her jewelry and the family china. She left me an envelope with $8,000 in cash and a small handwritten note. It said, "For one of your brilliant projects, make something wonderful. I believe in you." That money was seed. It was the last gift of faith anyone had ever given me, and I refused to waste it. I had been a coder since my college days, always fascinated with the stock market, not as a gambler, but as a system of patterns. I was obsessed with the idea of creating algorithmic prediction models that could see the future, even if it was just a few seconds into the future. I believed that human emotion, fear, and greed created predictable waves in the market, and that a machine, free of those emotions, could learn to ride them. So I started building. In the quiet of my nights, after my boring day job in IT support, I would work. That $8,000 went into better hardware, cloud computing resources, and endless cups of coffee. I called my project Spectra. It was an artificial intelligence, a trading algorithm that I designed from scratch. The first year was full of failures. I lost almost half the money on bad models and failed predictions. I almost gave up a dozen times. But my grandmother's note was taped to my monitor. "I believe in you," so I kept going. I refined the code. I fed Spectra more data, teaching it to recognize patterns, to learn from its mistakes, to think faster and more logically than any human trader could. The breakthrough came on a rainy Wednesday night. I had been working for 36 hours straight, tweaking a deep learning module. I ran a simulation, and then, with the last of my grandmother's money, about 1 on 100, I let Spectra make a series of live micro trades on the foreign exchange market. I woke up the next morning to find my account balance was over $17,000. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. It wasn't a fluke. I ran the program again. By the end of the week, I had over $50,000. By the end of the month, it was nearly $500,000. Spectra wasn't just working, it was a miracle. It could analyze trillions of data points in a nanosecond, forecasting market trends with an accuracy that was almost terrifying. I knew I was sitting on a financial nuclear bomb. The first thing I did was protect it. I incorporated quietly under an anonymous holding company, a bland, forgettable name, Orion Quantum Capital. I hired lawyers and accountants through encrypted channels, never meeting them in person. My identity was buried under layers of corporate shells and legal firewalls. To the world, Orion was a mysterious boutique investment firm with an impossibly good track record. To me, it was just Spectra, humming away on a secure server network, managed from the laptop on my cheap kitchen table. Over the next decade, that initial seed of $8,000 grew at an exponential rate. When Spectra began performing better than the world's top hedge funds, I diversified. I moved the assets into international accounts, real estate, tech investments, and blue-chip stocks. By the time I turned 40, the seed had grown into a forest, a vast, sprawling empire of wealth. The total value of Orion's assets was $4.2 billion. I was, by every possible metric, a billionaire, a ghost, a whisper in the financial world, and absolutely no one knew. My parents still thought I was working a dead-end IT job. Vanessa still saw me as her broke, pathetic little sister. I never upgraded my life. I kept the same apartment, the same car. I bought my clothes from discount stores. It started as a way to maintain my anonymity, but it became something more. It was a silent rebellion. Their world revolved around the appearance of success, the big house, the fancy car, the expensive clothes. They valued the wrapper, not the gift inside. So I kept my gift hidden, wrapped in brown paper, knowing its true worth myself. And that's what made the scene at the bank sting in a new and unbearable way. The irony was suffocating. My sister, the branch manager, mocking me for needing $150, had absolutely no idea that she was speaking to the person whose assets propped up the entire financial institution she worked for. The humiliation wasn't about money. It was about the chasm between their perception of me and the reality I had secretly built. She wasn't just mocking her sister. She was mocking the very foundation of her own small, fragile kingdom. And she had no idea. I drove home from the bank in a daze. The city traffic, the drone of the radio, the gray afternoon sky, it all felt distant, like I was watching my life through a thick pane of glass. Vanessa's voice was on a loop in my head, each cruel word replaying with perfect clarity. What, 50? Do you even have that much in your account? The shame from the bank was a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth. For a little while, it was all I could feel. It was a heavy cloak that settled over me, whispering all the old familiar lies. You are small. You are worthless. You are nothing. I walked into my quiet apartment and dropped my keys on the counter. The silence was absolute. I made a cup of coffee and sat on my sofa, but I didn't drink it. I just held the warm mug in my hands, staring at the blank wall as the coffee slowly went cold. But as the hours passed, something began to change. The hot, stinging shame started to fade. The deep, aching hurt began to recede. And in their place, something else rose up. It wasn't rage. It wasn't a desire for screaming, tearful revenge. It was something much colder, much quieter, and infinitely more powerful. It was clarity. A calm, focused energy that settled deep in my bones. For 41 years, I had played their game by their rules. I had accepted my role as the lesser daughter, the forgotten sister. I had absorbed the little cuts, the dismissive comments, the casual cruelty, because I thought that was the price of peace. I thought that by staying quiet, by making myself small, I was keeping the family from fracturing. But sitting there, in the dim light of my apartment, I finally understood. There was no game to win. Their perception of me was set in stone. It didn't matter what I did or what I achieved. They would only ever see what they wanted to see. The quiet, unsuccessful girl who couldn't possibly measure up to her brilliant sister. The humiliation at the bank wasn't the cause of my decision. It was simply the final piece of evidence. It was the last straw on a camel's back that had been breaking for decades. I wasn't angry anymore. I was clear. With a deep sense of purpose, I walked over to my desk and opened my laptop. The screen flickered to life, illuminating my face in its cool blue light. I connected to the secure server, my fingers flying across the keyboard, entering the complex passphrases and biometric scans that guarded my empire. The Orion Quantum Capital dashboard appeared. It was a clean, minimalist interface, showing charts, asset allocations, and market movements in real time. It was my real world, the one I had built. Out of curiosity, I decided to trace a thread. One of my primary holding companies, a massive corporate entity based in Delaware, had been on an acquisition spree over the last year, buying up smaller regional banks to diversify its portfolio. I pulled up the list of acquisitions. My eyes scanned down the list of names, and then I saw it. Crescent National Bank. The irony was so thick it was almost comical. It almost made me laugh out loud. My sister's bank. The stage for her grand performance of my humiliation. It was a subsidiary of a company that was a subsidiary of a company that I owned entirely. Vanessa worked for me, indirectly, through 3 corporate layers and a mountain of legal paperwork. But the fact remained. Her salary, her title, her glass-walled office, all of it was enabled by the profits generated by my creation. She was a tiny, insignificant employee in her little sister's massive, silent empire. I navigated to the accounts page, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. I located the primary liquidity reserve that Orion held within the Crescent National Banking Network. It was a colossal sum, parked there as a stability measure for the parent company. I stared at the glowing number on my screen. Orion Quantum Capital Reserve, $4,216,870,000 USD. My breath caught in my throat. If I pulled that balance, if I transferred that entire sum out of their network in one go, the effect would be catastrophic. The bank's internal systems would register it as a complete capital flight. Automated safeguards would trigger. Liquidity ratios would collapse. It would create a digital earthquake, and her branch, her tiny little kingdom, would be at the epicenter. The power to shatter her world was right there, under my fingertips. One click, that's all it would take. But as I looked at the number, the feeling wasn't one of vengeful glee. It was something else. It was a sense of balance, of order. For years, the scales of our family had been tipped so far in her favor that they had broken. She had all the power, all the worth, all the attention. I had none. This wasn't about revenge. Revenge was messy and emotional. This was about correcting a fundamental error in the system. It was about balance. It was about showing her and my family, and maybe even myself, what was real. I slept soundly that night, more deeply than I had in years. There were no swirling thoughts, no anxiety, no replaying of past hurts. There was only a profound sense of calm. When I woke up the next morning, the sun was just beginning to stream through my window, casting long shadows across the floor. I felt rested. I felt ready. I didn't dress to impress. I didn't put on a power suit or expensive jewelry. That was Vanessa's armor, not mine. I chose my uniform of invisibility, a simple navy blouse, a pair of well-fitting gray trousers, and the same comfortable flats I had worn the day before. I pulled my hair back into a neat, simple bun. No makeup, no pretense. I was not going to play a part. I was just going to be myself, my real self. At exactly 9 a.m., I sat at my kitchen table with a fresh cup of coffee and my phone. I dialed a number from memory. It was the direct line to my lead counsel, a man I had never met in person but had worked with for nearly a decade. He was the public face of Orion's legal operations, a brilliant and discreet professional who executed my commands without question. He answered on the first ring. "Good morning," he said, his voice crisp and professional. "Good morning, Robert," I replied, my own voice even and steady. "I need you to initiate the liquidity stress test on the Crescent National Holdings." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. This was an unusual request. A liquidity test on this scale was not a standard procedure. It was a move you made when you were preparing for a hostile takeover or signaling a massive loss of confidence in an institution. It was a kill shot. "All of it?" Robert asked, a hint of surprise in his voice. "The full $4.2 billion? Every cent," I confirmed. "Effective immediately." "Understood," he said without further question. "I'll trigger the order. The system is automated from here. The initial wire instructions will hit their central processing in about 5 minutes." "Thank you, Robert," I said, and ended the call. That was it. The first domino had been pushed. The instruction I had given wasn't just a simple withdrawal request. An electronic transfer of that magnitude is a shockwave. When the order hit Crescent National Bank's central system, their transaction monitoring algorithms would have immediately flagged it as a catastrophic risk. It was an amount so large that it exceeded the branches and likely the entire regional division's available liquid assets. Within minutes, alarms would be screaming on trading floors and in server rooms I would never see. The bank's automated risk management system would go into emergency freeze mode. It was designed to prevent a total collapse by halting major transactions, locking down accounts, and severing connections to the wider financial network until human executives could intervene. And in the middle of that digital firestorm was Vanessa's branch. The request would be traced back to the parent company, then to Orion, but the physical assets were technically held and managed across their network. Her branch was a node in that network. When the system froze, her branch would freeze with it. Her terminals would lock. Her transactions would fail. Her authority would evaporate. She would be completely, utterly powerless. I finished my coffee slowly, watching the dust motes dance in the morning sunlight. I felt no rush, no giddy excitement. I felt only the quiet, satisfying hum of a complex machine, a machine I had built, finally executing the function it was designed for. I gave it an hour. I wanted the chaos to build. I wanted the panic to set in. I wanted them to have enough time to realize that they were not in control. At 10:15 a.m., I picked up my purse, left my apartment, and drove to the bank. It was time to see my work, of course. Here is the conclusion of your story, with parts 6, 7, 8, and 9 expanded to your requested length. When I walked through the heavy glass doors of Crescent National Bank for the second time in 24 hours, the atmosphere was unrecognizable. The serene corporate calm from yesterday had been shattered. Now it was a scene of controlled high-stakes chaos. The air, once cool and sterile, was thick with tension and the frantic energy of dozens of anxious people. A crowd of about 30 customers was clustered in the lobby, some in agitated little groups, others standing alone, their faces masks of confusion and growing anger. Phones were pressed to ears, voices were raised, and the pleasant, quiet hum of banking had been replaced by a chorus of frustration. "What do you mean the system is down?" A man in a construction uniform yelled at a young teller, his face red with fury. "I have a crew to pay. I need to make payroll." The teller, a young man who looked barely out of his teens, was pale and sweating. "I'm sorry, sir, we're experiencing a network-wide issue. We can't access any account information right now. It's a temporary freeze." "Temporary? I've been waiting for 40 minutes. Another woman chimed in, holding a crying toddler on her hip. "My mortgage payment is due today. Is the bank going to pay my late fee?" I stood near the entrance for a moment, an island of stillness in the turbulent sea of panic. I watched the scene unfold, my presence completely unnoticed. The bank staff, usually so poised and confident, were scurrying back and forth like ants in a disturbed hill. They spoke in hushed, urgent whispers, their professional smiles replaced with tight, worried lines. They had no answers. They were just as lost as their customers. And then I saw her. Vanessa was standing near her glass-walled office, her back to me. She was no longer the picture of calm authority. Her perfect hair had a few loose strands framing her face, which was flushed. She was gripping her phone so tightly her knuckles were white, and she was pacing a short, sharp path in front of her door. She was trying to project an aura of control, but the facade was cracking at the seams. I could see the frantic, hunted look in her eyes. She was a queen watching her castle crumble around her, and she had no idea why. I began to walk toward her. My steps were slow, deliberate, and silent on the marble floor. The chaos seemed to part for me. As I drew closer, I saw her snap at a teller who had approached her with a question. "I don't know, Mark. Just tell them to be patient," she hissed, her voice a low, sharp whip of sound. "I'm on the phone with Regional." She turned, ready to resume her pacing. And that's when she saw me. She froze mid-step, her phone still pressed to her ear. Her eyes widened, first in confusion, and then in pure, unadulterated rage. She ended her call abruptly and stormed toward me, her heels clicking like gunshots in the tense lobby. "You!" she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "What are you doing here again? Are you here to gloat? Did your pathetic little account overdraw and break the entire system?" Her voice was loud, drawing the attention of the people closest to us. They looked from her furious face to my calm one, their own problems momentarily forgotten in the face of this sudden personal drama. I didn't answer her immediately. I just looked at her, letting her anger wash over me. It was so predictable. In her world, if something went wrong, someone had to be blamed. And for her entire life, I had been her favorite person to blame. It was almost comforting in its familiarity. "I just came to check on my accounts, Vanessa," I said softly. "Your accounts?" She laughed, a wild, unhinged sound. "No one can check on their accounts. The entire network is frozen from here to the state capital. This is a major crisis, and you're wandering in here like you're lost. Go home, Stella. The adults are busy." She turned her back on me, a gesture of ultimate dismissal. But before she could take a step, a new commotion started at the bank's entrance. Two men in expensive charcoal suits hurried through the doors, followed by a younger man and woman in similar corporate attire, all clutching tablets. The man in the lead was older, with graying hair and a deeply worried expression. He was sweating despite the cool air in the bank. His eyes scanned the lobby frantically, like a general searching for the source of an attack. He swept past the angry customers, his gaze landing on Vanessa, and then, to her shock, moving past her to fixate on me. He rushed forward, his entourage struggling to keep up. He stopped directly in front of me, breathing heavily. "Miss Solon?" he said, his voice breathless and strained. "Miss Stella Solon?" Vanessa, who had been watching this with a baffled expression, stepped forward possessively. "Excuse me, Mr. Hahn. I'm handling things here," she said, trying to reassert her authority. "This is my sister. She was just leaving." Mr. Hahn, the regional director, looked at Vanessa as if she had just grown a second head. The expression on his face was a mixture of terror and utter disbelief. He ignored her completely, his full attention locked on me. "Miss Solon," he repeated, his voice dropping to a tone of profound, almost fearful respect. "I'm David Hahn, the regional director. We've been trying to reach you. We need to speak privately." "Right now." The lobby was now almost completely silent. Everyone was watching. Vanessa's frown deepened, her face a canvas of confusion. "Excuse me?" she said, stepping between us. "Why are you talking to her? She has nothing to do with this. I'm the manager of this branch." Mr. Hahn finally turned to look at Vanessa, and his expression was cold as ice. "You aren't understanding," he said, his words slow and deliberate, as if speaking to a child. "The network freeze, the transaction halt, all of it. It originated as a response to a single, massive liquidity transfer request." He paused, then turned back to me, his gaze unwavering. "The request came from Orion Quantum Capital." Vanessa's face remained blank. The name clearly meant nothing to her. "So? What does that have to do with my sister?" Mr. Hahn took a deep breath, like a man about to defuse a bomb. "Because your sister, Miss Stella Solon," he said, his voice clear and ringing in the silent lobby, "is Orion Quantum Capital's principal owner. The liquidity request came from her office. According to the documents I was just sent from our parent firm, she owns 87% of their total asset holdings. She, for all intents and purposes, owns this bank." The world stopped. Vanessa's mouth dropped open. The color drained from her face, not in a sudden rush, but in a slow, sickening wave, leaving her skin a pasty, grayish white. Her eyes, wide with horror, darted from Mr. Han's grim face to my calm one. She shook her head in a tiny, jerky motion, as if trying to dislodge a thought that was too impossible to hold. What? The words came out as a strangled whisper. The tellers behind the counter were staring, their own mouths agape. The customers were frozen, listening intently. They had come in with their own small financial dramas, only to stumble into a corporate Shakespearean tragedy. Mr. Han had turned his full attention back to me, his tone pleading. "We've halted the transaction temporarily to prevent a total system collapse, Miss Solon, but your final authorization is needed. Please, tell us what we need to do to rectify the situation." I held his gaze. I felt the weight of every eye in the room on me. This was the moment, the culmination of a lifetime of silence. "Understood," I said calmly, my voice steady. I then shifted my gaze, just slightly, to land on my sister. First, the manager responsible for the professional misconduct that occurred at this branch yesterday afternoon. She's relieved of her duties, effective immediately. A collective gasp went through the staff. Vanessa stumbled back a step, her hand flying to her chest as if she'd been physically struck. Her face crumpled, the disbelief finally giving way to sheer, uncomprehending panic. "No," she stammered, shaking her head more forcefully now. "No, you can't. Stella, you wouldn't. It was a joke. I was just teasing you." I finally looked at her. I really looked at her. And for the first time in our lives, she truly saw me. Not the sister she mocked. Not the invisible one who fixed her computer and faded into the background at parties. She saw the woman who held her entire world in the palm of her hand. The woman who could collapse everything she had ever built with a single quiet word. "You were right, Vanessa," I said softly, my voice carrying in the dead silence. 150 wasn't much. I held her gaze for one last second. But respect? That's priceless. There was no shouting, no dramatic, tearful scene. Vanessa's collapse was as quiet and complete as a building imploding in on itself. The fight drained out of her, replaced by a hollow, vacant shock. She just stood there, swaying slightly, her eyes still locked on me, her mind clearly unable to process the new reality that had just crashed down upon her. The entire foundation of her life, her career, her superiority, her understanding of her place in the world, and, most importantly, her understanding of mine, had been pulverized in less than 2 minutes. Mr. Han, seeing her state, gave a subtle nod to 2 of his corporate security staff who had entered behind him. They were not the bank's regular guards. They were dressed in the same sharp suits as the executives, their professionalism a cold, impersonal force. They moved with a quiet efficiency, flanking Vanessa on either side. One of them murmured something to her, his voice too low for me to hear. "Ma'am, if you'll come with us." She didn't resist. She didn't even seem to notice them at first. Her body moved mechanically, allowing them to gently guide her toward the exit. She looked small and lost between the 2 large men. Her former employees, the people she had managed and mentored, stood frozen behind the counters, their faces a mixture of pity, fear, and astonishment. They averted their eyes as she was led past them. They were already distancing themselves from the fallen queen. It was the quietest, most brutal firing I had ever witnessed. No shouting, no security dragging her away. Just the quiet, humming finality of her world crumbling into dust. She didn't look back. As the heavy glass doors swung shut behind her, a collective, nervous breath was released throughout the lobby. Mr. Han immediately turned to me, his face slick with sweat. He was in full damage control mode, his entire being focused on placating the new, unknown power that had just revealed itself in his bank. "Miss Solon," he began, his voice dripping with apology. "On behalf of Crescent National, on behalf of our parent company, I cannot begin to express how profoundly sorry I am for the system failure and for the unacceptable behavior of our former employee. It was a gross lapse in professional conduct. It will be dealt with in the severest terms, I assure you." He was practically bowing. It was a strange, uncomfortable sight. I had never had anyone, let alone a powerful man like him, look at me with such desperate deference. I gave him a single, slow nod. "Thank you, Mr. Han." He gestured toward Vanessa's office. "Please, can we speak in private? We need to begin the process of unfreezing the network. Your authorization is the key." "Of course," I said. He led the way, practically tripping over himself to open the glass door for me. As I stepped into Vanessa's office, the irony was so thick I could taste it. Just yesterday, she had sat behind this large, polished mahogany desk, the master of her universe. Now I was the one being ushered inside, and her nameplate was already being discreetly removed from the door by one of Han's assistants. Mr. Han closed the door, giving us the illusion of privacy, though I knew every employee in the lobby was staring through the glass walls. He gestured for me to take the large leather chair behind the desk, Vanessa's chair. I remained standing. "Please, Miss Solon, what are your instructions?" he asked, his hands clasped in front of him like a supplicant. "The entire regional network is paralyzed. The longer we wait, the greater the financial damage and the risk to our reputation." This was my moment of leverage. He expected me to be emotional, to be satisfied with my sister's dismissal. He was waiting for me to say, "Okay, it's done. You can turn everything back on now." But this was never just about Vanessa. It was about the culture that allowed someone like her to thrive, a culture that valued arrogance over competence, style over substance. "The freeze will be lifted when I am satisfied that the operational issues at this bank have been addressed," I said, my voice cold and firm. It was the voice I used in my head to direct Spectra, the voice of pure, unemotional logic. What happened yesterday was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a toxic culture of customer service. My sister felt empowered to humiliate a customer in a public space because she felt untouchable. "I want to know why," Han blinked, startled. He had expected a personal vendetta, but he was being confronted with a corporate audit. I don't understand," he stammered. "It's simple," I continued, walking slowly around the desk. I ran my hand along its smooth, cool surface. "I want a full, independent review of this branch's customer complaint history for the past 2 years. I want an overhaul of your customer service training protocols to be designed and implemented by a firm of my choosing. And I want a written report on my desk in 1 week detailing the steps you will take to ensure that every single person who walks through those doors is treated with respect, regardless of the balance in their account." His jaw worked silently. He was a banker, a man of numbers and profits. I was talking about culture, about respect. I was speaking a language he was not prepared for. "Of course, Miss Solon," he finally managed to say. "Whatever you require." "Good," I said. I looked around the office. On a shelf behind the desk were several framed photographs. One was of Vanessa with our parents, all of them beaming on a sunny golf course. There were no pictures of me. On the wall was her business degree and several Manager of the Year awards. All these trappings of success, and she had missed the most fundamental lesson. That real power isn't about the title on your door. It's about the person you are when no one is forcing you to be decent. Han's assistant knocked softly and entered with a tablet. "The authorization form, sir." Han took the tablet and offered it to me with a trembling hand. "If you would just sign here, Miss Solon, it will release the hold and allow the funds to be stabilized." I took the stylus. I looked at the digital document. It gave me Stella Solon, principal of Orion Quantum Capital, executive authority over the frozen assets. I signed my name at the bottom. The signature, my simple, unadorned name, glowed on the screen for a moment before being accepted by the system. With that single motion, the crisis was over. The order to unfreeze the network would ripple out, and within minutes the chaos in the lobby would subside. But the landscape had been permanently altered. Crescent National Bank, the empire Vanessa had built her entire identity on, now existed under my signature. "No hard feelings, Mr. Han," I said, handing the tablet back to him. "Just business." I turned and walked out of the office, not looking back. The employees in the lobby stared at me as I passed. Their fear had been replaced by a quiet, stunned awe. I was no longer the invisible sister. I was something else entirely. As I walked out into the bright morning sun, I felt a lightness I hadn't felt in years. The debt had been paid. The scales were finally, perfectly, balanced. The rest of the day passed in a quiet, surreal blur. I went home, made a sandwich I didn't eat, and watched the city go by from my apartment window. I felt strangely empty, but it wasn't a bad emptiness. It was the clean, quiet space left behind after a storm has passed, leveling everything in its path. The real storm, I knew, was yet to come. It arrived at 6:17 p.m. My phone, which had been silent all day, buzzed violently on the kitchen counter. The screen lit up with a picture of my mother. I stared at it for a long moment, my heart giving a single hard thump against my ribs. I knew what this was. I had been preparing for it my whole life. I took a deep breath and answered, "Hello, Mom. Stella, what have you done?" Her voice was a shriek, high-pitched and jagged with hysteria. There was no greeting, no preamble, just pure, undiluted rage. "Your sister just showed up here. She's a complete mess." "They fired her. They had security walk her out of her own bank. She said you did it. How could you? How could you humiliate your sister like that?" I held the phone slightly away from my ear, listening to the torrent of accusations. It was all about Vanessa. Vanessa was a mess. Vanessa was humiliated. The focus, as always, was entirely on her. "Mom," I said, my voice level and calm. "There was a professional issue at the bank. It was a business decision." "A business decision?" She shrieked again, her voice cracking. "Don't you lie to me! Vanessa said you own the bank." "You own it? How is that even possible?" "You work in computers! This is about jealousy. It always has been. You've always been jealous of your sister's success, and now you've found some horrible way to ruin her." The accusation was so old, so tired. It had lost its power to sting. For years, they had interpreted my quietness as jealousy, my independence as resentment. They had painted a picture of me that made their favoritism feel justified. I was the bitter, unsuccessful sister, and Vanessa was the brilliant, persecuted star. "I'm not jealous, Mom," I said, the words feeling simple and true. I just demanded to be treated with respect. "Vanessa was not respectful." "Respect?" She scoffed. "She is your sister. Family is supposed to be there for each other, to lift each other up, not tear each other down." She told us what happened. She made a little joke about you needing money. "A joke, Stella? And for that, you destroy her entire career? What kind of monster are you?" I was silent. There was nothing I could say that she would be able to hear. Her reality was already set. In her story, Vanessa was the victim. I was the villain. It was as simple as that. "I have to go, Mom," I said quietly. "Don't you hang up on me," she yelled. "You fix this. You call that bank and you tell them you made a mistake. You give your sister her job back right now." "Goodbye, Mom," I said, and I ended the call. My hand was perfectly steady. 20 minutes later, the phone rang again. This time it was my father. His approach would be different, I knew. He wouldn't shriek. He would be calm, rational, patriarchal. He would try to reason me back into my designated place. "Stella," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Your mother is very upset." "I know," I said. "I've just spoken with Vanessa," he continued. "She told me her side of the story. Now, I know there are two sides to everything, but this seems extreme, to get her fired, to ruin her career. Stella, that's not who we are. That's not how we raised you." "You raised me to be invisible, Dad," I replied, the words coming out before I could stop them. I just decided to stop. There was a stunned silence on the other end. I had never spoken to him like that before. "That's not fair," he said, his voice losing some of its calm. "We have always loved you and your sister equally." "No, you haven't," I said, the truth of it making me feel strangely light. "You loved her. You tolerated me. There's a difference." He sighed, a long, weary sound of a man who did not want to have this conversation. "Look, this isn't about the past. This is about the future. Your sister has made a mistake. She's admitted it. She's willing to apologize. But you have to meet her halfway. Family comes first. You need to fix this before it's too late, before you do permanent damage to this family." "The damage was already done, Dad," I said. "A long, long time ago. I didn't start this. I just finished it." "What's that supposed to mean?" he demanded. "It means that for my entire life, the rule in this family has been that Vanessa's feelings matter, and mine don't. Vanessa's career matters, and mine doesn't. Vanessa's life is the main event, and mine is a footnote. I'm just living by the rules you all established. I'm finally putting myself first, just like you taught me to let Vanessa do." He was speechless. I had taken their entire worldview and turned it back on them. I was using their own twisted logic to justify my actions. "Goodbye, Dad," I said, and I hung up before he could respond. Then came the texts. They were from Vanessa, a rapid-fire barrage of blue bubbles appearing on my screen. The first one, sent moments after my dad's call ended. "You think you're so powerful now, don't you? You'll regret this. Mom and Dad see right through you." The second, a few minutes later, "How did you even do it? Where did you get that kind of money? Are you in some kind of trouble?" The third, an hour later, the anger giving way to a pleading tone. "Look, I know I was a bitch yesterday. I was stressed. I didn't mean it. It was a stupid joke. You can't ruin my life over a stupid joke." And finally, late into the night, the final text arrived. It was dripping with a desperation I had never seen from her before. "Please, Stella, I'm sorry. I will get on my knees and beg if you want. I'll apologize to everyone. I'll do anything. Just make it stop. Please, I have nothing. Please give me my job back." I stared at the messages, a timeline of her entire world unraveling. The anger, the confusion, the bargaining, the begging. I felt a brief, faint flicker of pity for her, not for the loss of her job, but for the utter poverty of her spirit. Her identity was so wrapped up in her title and her status that without them, she was nothing. I thought about all the years I had yearned for an apology from her, for any acknowledgement of the pain she had caused. And here it was, a desperate, self-serving plea, offered up not because she was truly sorry, but because she was broken and wanted me to fix her, just like I had always fixed everything else. But I wasn't the family repairman anymore. With a calm, deliberate motion, I highlighted my mom's number, my dad's number, and my sister's number. I looked at their names on my screen one last time. Then I pressed block, and then I pressed delete conversation. I watched as the record of their frantic, selfish pain vanished from my screen, leaving behind only clean, empty space. For years, I had paid for their peace with my silence. Now silence was mine again, and it was a price I was no longer willing to pay. I wasn't giving it back. The months that followed were the quietest of my adult life. The dramatic crescendo of the bank incident faded, leaving behind not a void, but a gentle, peaceful silence. There were no more angry phone calls, no passive-aggressive family dinners to dread, no more walking on eggshells to manage my sister's ego or my parents' expectations. The absence of that constant, low-grade stress was like taking off a heavy coat I didn't even realize I had been wearing for 41 years. My life didn't change on the surface. I still lived in the same apartment, drove the same car, and worked from the same laptop at my kitchen table. But inside, everything was different. The work I did on Spectra, which had once been my secret escape from a world that diminished me, now felt like a joyful act of creation. The simple routines of my day, a morning walk in the park, reading a book on my balcony, the quiet hum of my servers, felt different. They were no longer acts of hiding but conscious choices. My life was finally, completely my own. I heard snippets about my family through the grapevine of distant relatives. Vanessa had moved out of the city, too humiliated to stay. She was living with my parents temporarily. The thought of the three of them, trapped in that house together with their shared disappointment and shattered narratives, brought me no pleasure, but it brought me no pain either. It was simply a fact, like a weather report from a country I no longer lived in. My parents, as I expected, tried to maintain the fiction of a family. Around Thanksgiving, I received a text from my mother. "Hope you have a happy Thanksgiving." At Christmas, one from my dad. "Merry Christmas, Stella. Hope you're well." They were polite, lukewarm messages sent from a great distance. They were the empty gestures of people who felt obligated to knock on a door they no longer had the key to. I never replied. There was nothing left to say. My wealth, the vast, silent fortune I had built in the dark, had served its purpose as a shield and a lever. It had balanced the scales. But now, sitting in the quiet of my new life, I knew that wasn't its ultimate purpose. A shield is a defensive weapon. I wanted to build something. The idea came to me one afternoon while I was reading through tech journals. I kept seeing the same pattern. Brilliant ideas from young women in science, technology, engineering, and math being underfunded, overlooked, and dismissed. I saw my own story repeated again and again. These were the quiet ones, the ones in the background, the ones whose passion was mistaken for a frivolous hobby. They were the girls who were told their dreams were unrealistic, just as I had been. That's when the Orion Foundation was born. It wasn't a grand, press release-worthy event. It was a quiet decision, made at my kitchen table. I allocated an initial fund of $200 million, a fraction of my net worth, but a sum that could change thousands of lives. The foundation's mission was simple: to fund women in STEM, to provide scholarships, grants, and mentorship to the girls and women who were trying to build something wonderful, but lacked the one thing they needed most: someone to believe in them. I spent the next few months building the foundation, working with the same quiet intensity I had used to build Spectra. I hired a small dedicated team and we built a platform to find and support these women. I read hundreds of applications myself. Their stories were a poignant echo of my own. They wrote about families who didn't understand, teachers who underestimated them, and a world that constantly told them they didn't belong. The very first scholarship recipient was a 19-year-old coder from a small town in Ohio. Her name was Maya. Her application was breathtaking. She had taught herself 3 programming languages using library books and had built a revolutionary water purification monitoring system for her town's contaminated river, all on a 10-year-old laptop her parents thought she should be using for homework instead of playing on the computer. In her essay, she wrote, "I know my ideas are good, but it's hard to keep believing in yourself when you're the only one who does." I knew I had to meet her. I flew her to the city, not for a stuffy awards ceremony, but for coffee. We met in a small, quiet cafe. She was shy, with brilliant, curious eyes that took in everything. She was so nervous her hands trembled as she held her cup. She told me about her project, her voice growing stronger and more passionate as she explained the code, the hardware, the potential it had to help communities like hers all over the world. She was incandescent with passion. After she finished, she looked down at her hands, a blush creeping up her neck. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know I probably sound crazy. No one ever really believed I could do this." I felt a powerful, emotional resonance with her words. It was the echo of my own heart, my own lonely journey. I reached across the table and smiled, and this smile was nothing like the one I had given my sister in the bank. This one was warm, genuine, and full of recognition. "Maya," I said softly, "you don't sound crazy at all. You sound like a founder." I paused, letting the word sink in. "And as for no one believing in you, then you'll fit right in with us?" Tears welled in her eyes, bright and clear. They weren't tears of sadness, but of relief. The overwhelming, soul-shaking relief of finally being seen. In that moment, I understood the true nature of power. It wasn't about collapsing a system or winning a fight. That was just the beginning, the clearing of the ground. True power was about building something new in its place. My fortune was no longer a secret weapon. It was a tool. It was seed money for a whole new generation of quiet girls who were going to change the world. And this time, they wouldn't have to do it alone. People like to laugh at the quiet ones, the ones who don't fight back, who don't flaunt what they have. But remember, silence isn't weakness. It's patience. It's observation. It's the time you spend building your own world when the one you're in refuses to make a place for you. And when the day comes, patience speaks louder than pride ever will. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been made to feel small, hit like, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. Because the quiet ones, we remember everything.